Good evening, everyone, and welcome to OTF Webinar Connects Media, Entertainment, Education. Tonight our presenters are Andrew Bronski and Jamie Rainburn, and they happen to come from my hometown, or my home area, Waterloo Region District School Board. They are a couple of quite infamous high school teachers, I would say. They do lots of presentations, get around the province, so you may run into them in the future. Really looking forward to this one. This is quite an important topic. And let's turn it over to them. Take it away, Jamie and Andrew.
Thanks a lot for the intro, Trish. Always a pleasure to be working with you, and thank you to the rest of you for joining us tonight. As Trish said, my name is Andrew Bronski, and I'm a high school teacher. I teach English here in Kitchener-Waterloo at Huron Heights Secondary School.
And I'm Jamie Rayburn. I also teach at Huron Heights Secondary School in Kitchener in the Waterloo Region District School Board, and I'm very happy to be here tonight.
Before we go further, I just want to check base with everybody because sometimes this goes great and sometimes it doesn't. How are we sounding so far? Can you give us a green check mark to say, let us know if we sound okay, and a red X if it's not, the volume's not going through very well.
And the really tricky question here is, am I sounding okay? Because I am infamous for having the world's quietest teacher voice ever. And so I just want to make sure that I'm okay. I have my face like basically in my microphone at the moment.
Well, it looks like green check marks across the board there, so let's take that as a good sign and let's roll with that. That's the first time I've ever had like straight green check marks off the bat for this, so good start.
I think that's the first time anybody's ever said they can actually hear me.
Well, we're off to a very good start then. Well, as we said, thank you for joining us tonight. We actually got a smaller group, which means this probably will go by a little quicker, and nothing wrong with that on a beautiful day. And it also means I think it opens the option for interaction a bit more. So we'll throw it out to you, Farron, Glodon, Laura, and Nami. Thank you again for being here, and feel free to jump in the conversation tonight in any way. Ask questions as we're going through. We're happy to have you guys jump on the mic if you have it there. If you want to jump in the conversation, or feel free to throw questions in the chat, and we can jump on them that way too. But Jamie and I are happy to make this a little more interactive since we have a smaller group tonight.
Absolutely, 100% agree. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to actually ask you guys, people, what do you teach? Because we're high school English teachers, and so we're coming from that perspective, but we love to hear what other people are teaching. And we also use this as a learning opportunity for us. We're working on a project with some elementary educators in our board, and it's been a phenomenal learning experience for us to hear what's happening at the elementary level. So please do share with us what you teach. Awesome. Oh, somebody's a WRDSB person. All right.
Nice mix. So Laura, high school English teacher. So again, Jamie and I always talking some of the stuff we do in our classrooms. This presentation is definitely not geared specifically at English. We try to keep it open to everybody across the K-12 space. So Farron, this should definitely hopefully have some interest for you in the Innovation and Learning Coach. Great job, by the way. And Melanie, again, we'll definitely have some ideas here that kind of hopefully span subjects and curriculum across K-12. So we want to keep this pretty open, but some of the examples we share with you tonight come from our English classroom, but it's not tied specifically to English curriculum. That being said, Laura, for you, you know media is part of our curriculum. So hopefully you'll get some ideas that you can kind of take back to your classroom from this presentation too. And again, please feel free to share all of you ideas you're going through or different tools, different ideas, because we love to learn as well. So Jamie and I don't say the experts here, but just sharing some ideas of what we've done in the past. Okay, so with that in mind, let's get this presentation rolling. We covered down the introductions there already, but Jamie and I are always happy to connect with other teachers. So if you're a Twitter user, feel free to jump online and reach out to either of us after the fact. We're always happy to connect with other educators.
Bias in the media. Okay, interesting. So what we wanted to start with is we wanted to kind of dive into the philosophical change behind incorporating media into the classroom. What we found is that students really see media and they see their phones and they see all, like our schools or our board at the secondary level is a one-to-one Chromebook board. A lot of times it's really hard to get students out of the mindset that a digital device is for entertainment only. And what some of the stuff that they do on a daily basis, like Snapchat, Tweet, Instagram, whatever, we can actually use quite a bit in the classroom to show their thinking in a more visual way. And so for us, it's been a philosophical change for A, for our pedagogy, but B, for the kids, and C, for the parents. We definitely have had some parents say to us, why are you using so much technology, or why are you using so much media in the classroom? That's not what an English class is. And it's actually 25% of our curriculum. And so it's really been changing the culture around media as it is.
Yeah, and I think another philosophical change here too was that like we're so inundated by media in this day and age and surround us in all these different ways. And a lot of times we're not that aware of it. And Laura already mentioned this idea of like looking at bias. And so on a few levels, I think it's one is very important to talk about and look at media and how it's being used in our classrooms, think about how it ties to our curriculum in any space. And the other big philosophical change for me was looking at more from an assessment standpoint, from a documentation standpoint in our classrooms, and thinking about leveraging the tools we have and the technology we have in different platforms for media in different ways to give students different opportunities to show their learning in different ways. And so for both Jamie and I, we actually were very fortunate to get a TLLP grant, which comes from the Ministry of Education and the Ontario Teachers Federation, actually in a partnership. And one of the things we wanted to look at was different forms of assessment. And so we really looked to leverage tools in different ways in our students and give them a lot more voice and choice in how they were demonstrating their learning and exploring that space. And so that was a kind of a big focus for our research. And so what we found was some really, really powerful examples of if you can kind of just give students different tools where, again, whatever you have in your school board, if it's BYOD, as Jimmy mentioned, we're very fortunate at the secondary level in one of the region here, where we actually have one-to-one Chromebooks. So at our high school, all the students from grade 9 to grade 11 actually have a Chromebook that the school board gives them. They can take it home with them and have it. We realized we're very technology rich in that way. But even with a class set of iPads or 5 iPads in classrooms or Chromebooks or the BYOD policy and students with their phones, there's so many opportunities for students to document and share their learning in so many ways, and that's kind of something we want to explore with you tonight too, is think about how that can be leveraged and how you can work with that. Sorry, Dan, let's go ahead.
Okay, so this is one of Andrew's favorite sayings around the office, and that he's very often telling people, don't worry about it, it's going to be okay. One of the things that we know that our teachers like to be is we like to know exactly what we're doing so that we don't make any mistakes and that things go well. And so there's lots of times where you might ask a student to do something and you want to be able to provide them with the tool and guide them through it. But one of the things that I think we have to be okay with is that technology is moving so quickly these days that you just have to be okay with it. You're not going to be able to do everything because it's really feasibly not possible to know how to use every single tool out there. And there's lots of times where kids, if you just tell them, go figure it out, they will. And, like YouTube is a great example of that. We've had so many kids who they've said, hey, I had this idea, and we'll tell them, go Google it. Or go to YouTube and look up a tutorial, or go find a tool and then teach us how to use it. But our default is very much to want to know how to do everything so that we can make it easy for our students. And I think that by letting go of that control, we very much can make it more of an authentic learning opportunity for the students.
Yeah, absolutely. I see this in a few different levels. And one for me, this was a pedagogical shift for me as a teacher, was just kind of pushing back your students and telling them to search things out and go and figure things out for themselves. I started off very traditional in my practice, and I kind of felt myself as being at the center of the classroom as a teacher, and me needing to know and kind of me being that old traditional model, being that source of all knowledge in my classroom. And I've really, really moved away from that. I've really realized that I can't compete with Google or the internet at all, and I've come to terms with that as an educator. And so our students have so access to so many things, and it's so easy in this day and age to learn, to use a tool to kind of get at something, and again, just Google it and go and explore for a little bit. And then also like working with teachers and saying that you don't necessarily need to be at the center of your classroom anymore. Give your students some freedom. And so I love to see is like you don't need to be expert, you need to know how to do it. So we're going to give you a bunch of examples of kind of our space for that today. Almost everything we're going to show you and how we leverage media in our classrooms for students to kind of document their learning and kind of show it to us in different ways. Was Jamie and I probably would do a much worse job than our students have done of it on our own, and that's okay. It's giving them some voice and choice for finding the different ways that they can use tools and media to show and demonstrate the really in a variety of forms of curriculum, and that being okay. And the other comes down to an assessment piece is what are you actually assessing? And it shouldn't be the assessment of the tool. It shouldn't be the structure kind of that space. It's the actual curriculum you're looking at. And so talking about what you're really looking for from your students and then giving them options for how they want to demonstrate that to you can be really, really powerful. We actually saw some really, really fantastic stuff with our students that we're also looking forward to sharing with you today.
And I mean, the other thing too is that life isn't easy, and so by allowing students to actually have to figure something out like this for themselves, it gives them a great sense of purpose and self-confidence when they actually can do it, but also you're teaching them that you trust them and that providing them with the skills to be resilient. And sometimes I think that that's what we leave out in education, because at the end of the day, so many of us just really feel like we want to do the best by our students, and by providing them with like very guided, structured ways of using media or how to use a tool, we're actually doing them a disservice, because kids need that chance to have things not go quite the way they had envisioned, and then they have to figure out what to do, or that they have this vision and how do they enact it. So by giving them the chance to actually, as Melanie has very eloquently put it in there, have a productive struggle, absolutely. That's where the really good, deep learning happens. And so by giving them that opportunity, I think we're actually teaching them resilience and teaching them to depend on themselves so that they can actually figure out the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And another space Jamie and I have explored with through all of this is looking at more of an inquiry approach in our classrooms. And so throwing questions at students to kind of get their minds going and thinking a process and kind of guiding them through a space, but also giving them some freedom to go and explore that. And so one, they're exploring their own learning in different ways, but also looking at exploring how they're going to show and demonstrate that learning in other ways too. And so again, that's a space we really want to cover with you as a whole here, and looking at how can media be used in your classroom, from one for the learning space and two for the documentation space, and then lastly for students finding ways to actually demonstrate their learning to you in different ways. With all that being in mind then, one place we want to start off in a very early space was just talking about codes and conventions and kind of what actually goes into media. If you're talking about having students using it or using it yourself in the classroom, it's nice to have some common terminology and some ways of looking at it. And so we actually want to start off by sharing a video with you. Jamie actually found this one. She helped write a course on media, actually, so she's a great person doing the session tonight for the ministry. But this is kind of like a core piece for it, and I'll let her speak to it in a big sec. But we've used this with our students as well. I'm just kind of putting it to them, so we can get to that common language and common terminology for a few things, and even just as a quick, simple way to look at how we look at media and how it's media used, and how it kind of plays into our classrooms. But Jamie, do you want to speak to this video a little more before we jump to it?
Yeah, so it's a TED Ed video, and what they've done, the creators have put together all kinds of like various media, and then they've given you a lens of how, a couple different lenses actually, of how you actually analyze media. And for a lot of, like from our own colleagues, we've had suggestions that like, how do you actually analyze media? How do you create media? And if you're talking about the English curriculum, analysis of media is really important. But what this video very clearly does is it lays out with all kinds of very relatable, that's the other piece here that's really great for the students. These are all very relatable images, videos, things that kids will be very familiar with. So then it allows you to understand where you're coming from, and then it's rooted in research as well. So showing students that media analysis isn't just, hey, I like that video. It's so much more than that, and giving them the language to actually discuss it in an intellectual way.
Okay, so with that in mind, we're actually going to have you guys go watch the video here. I've done some sessions in the past where we try to play the video in the session, and it can get pretty laggy, and it's working for some people, not working for other people. So we're going to ask Trish, if you can drop the link to this video in the chat group for everybody. There you go, Trish, right on cue. I knew you'd have that queued up and ready to go. What we're going to ask each of you to do is if you can click the link in the chat, go and watch this video. It's only 4 or 5 minutes long, I believe. And then once you've watched it, we'll kind of come back and speak to a little bit as a group and chat about it as a little group. But once we know when everyone's back and has watched the video, if you could come back and give us that green check mark to let us know that you're back. Both you and I are going to turn our mics off here and that you all go off and watch this video and then come back to the chat. So hope you enjoy it. Okay, it looks like most people are back here and to finish off the video. So if you have any questions or any ideas from it, feel free to jump in the chat. Or again, if you have a microphone, you can jump on here as well too and just ask away because we have a smaller group. But I'm going to pass over to Jamie here. Jamie, what were kind of your big takeaways? What do you want to share with the group coming out of this video?
Well, one of the things I love about this video is it points out to kids that everything we see has some kind of hidden meaning, and that when advertisers or people in general create media, they have a specific purpose in mind, they have an audience in mind, and then they use specific techniques to actually get their message across in a really solid fashion. And so I think that even if you're teaching, say, a science class or a math class or something like that, you can still use media to your advantage and ask kids to think about this, that what's the most powerful way you can show your message? And by having them think about things like the color scheme, think camera angles, that kind of thing, it gives you the chance to have them showcase some of the skills that they probably, like a number of them will actually have skills along those lines where they played around with it at the very least. And then ask them to think about what is the best way to demonstrate your learning. One of the things that Andrew and I often talk about is that if we were science teachers, there'd be such interesting things we would try to do with media. I was having an interesting conversation with our science head the other day talking about that. I think it would be super cool to have their students record a lab, for example, and hyperlapse it so that it goes by super quickly. And then the kids give you some kind of reflection based on that. But if they were going to do that, then it would be really interesting for them to be considering what's the most effective camera angle to record, or do you have to use multiple camera angles? What's the best lighting? Like, how can you showcase exactly what you're trying to get across? And so I think that it's really powerful if we're thinking about all these elements of media going into what we're having students create. And so in getting people to think along the lines of, like, it matters what kind of lighting I have in my photo or video or whatever, or it matters that if I have, like, I unplugged my fish tank tonight so that you guys could hear me because it's really bubbly. So, like, stuff like that matters, that having kids then therefore think about that when they're showing their learning. It really gives us the best way to really have them document for you their learning. Feel free to also, say, and thank you for dropping in that TED-Ed has a great video on Pathos, Logos, and Ethos. Okay, Melanie, I agree, an emotional connection, absolutely. And thinking about how is meaning created and how can you be meaningful and how can you create it, but then how do you communicate it too? And, you know, at the end of the day, we're all people. And so by thinking along the lines of, like, if you're trying to get your message across, what is the way you're going to connect the most with people? And so that's, you know, lots of kids do that inherently when they post on Instagram, because they take a picture in a certain way, they add a caption that they know they're going to get a reaction from, or they add a hashtag so that they can be searchable. So people are, like, not just kids, but people in general are doing that. And so by asking them to use those codes and conventions in the media that you're creating, and things that they're already doing but they just don't realize that they can do for an educational purpose, really can allow for a richer product that they're creating for you.
Yeah, I agree. And Jamie, I hope you remember to turn your fish tank back on after the session, not kill your fish. But thank you for turning it off so we can hear you more easily. So yeah, and I totally agree. And I think one thing I want to give you guys some examples of later in the session is different media formats that we've kind of thrown our students into to try and think about having them document learning. If you really think about media, it's just, I mean, it's recording or a creation of something. And so the space we really want to get at to tonight is looking at different ways students can leverage different forms of media to show their learning and document their learning and share it with others, whether it be their classmates or you in a formative or kind of similar process. And so I think we're in this really cool space right now is like technology is becoming more accessible, more easy to use. Even with like walking around the iPad, like in grade 2, 3, or 4 class, having students snap pictures of the work they're doing and finding the right framing for how to do that and the ways to share it with their teacher, with other people. Can be really, really powerful. So that's kind of something we want to dive into tonight. And I thought this Cozy Convention video off the bat was kind of an interesting just overall look at all the things that kind of go into media. And it could be in a very complex level, like making a film, or something very simplistic as doing a quick 20-second audio recording. But with that in mind, let's kind of move on here. And so we really want to talk about the kind of process of how we do this. And so when we're looking to use media with our students, kind of looking at these three things. So really, what's the purpose of using it? And so for Jamie and I, it's different things. As English teachers, looking at analysis of media and creation of media as part of our curriculum. But again, really want to step back from that and just kind of have this idea of like looking at learning in general. What is the curriculum you're trying to get at with your students? Covering it down with them in whatever process you use. And then when it comes down to the task and audience, it's thinking about giving your students a task for some ways to create with media in some way to document their learning process and share it with others, whether it be their classmates or your teacher. And then again, that ties into that audience piece of looking at who is this for, who are we creating it for, what's the purpose of this, and what am I trying to use with this. Jamie, anything to add here?
No, I agree. And like within the task is we build in a lot of student voice and choice. There's lots of times where we'll ask students to create a product and we leave it at that. We give them a purpose and we ask them to think about who their audience is, but then we say, you show us how you're going to demonstrate this. And what I love about doing that is you get some just phenomenal things. I did this with my grade 12s, and I got a BuzzFeed-like video. I got some art that I had no idea these girls were such talented artists. I had some students create a spoken word poem set to a soundtrack to music that a girl wrote and then recorded herself playing on the violin, and asking them to just having them really think about what are your skills and how are you going to leverage them to demonstrate the learning that we've asked you to show us. And so I think it's really thinking about student voice and choice in there as well. When you're designing your time.
Now they jump into question, do our students struggle with the creative process? And it's been really fascinating, actually. And so this is something like Jamie and I have been playing around with. And so one thing I truly believe as an educator is that there is no one size that fits all in education. No matter what pedagogical method or teaching that you use in your classroom, it's not going to work for all 30 kids in your class. And so I think variety is very key. So they're definitely looking at more of an inquiry process in our class and kind of throwing students into it and having to ask them to use their creativity in different ways. Some students just take off and fly with that. Like a lot of our disengaged students, we say a more traditional model, love the freedom and the creativity, and they go off and do amazing, amazing things. And we've also seen some of our students who love it, say like more of a traditional method of the classroom where it's kind of like, you know, do your lesson, tell me what I'm supposed to know, show me an exemplar so that I can create and I'll give you that exemplar back. We had some students really not like this process and really struggle with the creative process. And so, Melanie, that's a really great question. So you need to think about and work with your students, but I would say it's also very valuable for our students to kind of be pushed into that creative process and asked to think for themselves and critically think and kind of think about their own learning, how would best is demonstrating and coming up with those ideas and not just having the teachers guide them through it all the time.
100% agree. The struggle is where the learning is, and that's what I try to convince them of, is that if you're not struggling, you're not learning anything. And so by creating a space where it's a safe struggle, where they feel like, okay, I can do this, and that if it doesn't quite turn out, speaks to the assessment practice, if it doesn't quite turn out in the way that you had wanted it to, then that's good learning too, and that's where metacognition comes in. Hey, and there it is, the process over the product. Nice timing, Andrew.
Yeah, that was a great segue, Melanie, so thank you. You timed it perfectly. We were kind of anticipating a question like that, actually, and so kudos to you. We'll send you the $5 later for getting that done for us on time.
And so one of the things that we really, really try to emphasize with our students is that it's the process, it's not the product. Ideally, we want you to create a high-quality product at the end, absolutely, to show us what you've learned. But at the same time, we want to see the plan, and we want to see what you're doing along the way. And we're going to have conversations, and we're going to observe, and we're going to document your ideas, and we're going to document how you're planning to accomplish your goals. And then we're going to ask you at the end, if it didn't turn out the way you wanted it to, why, and what went wrong, and then what did you learn from it. And so truly, one of the things like I do tell my students, if you're not struggling, you didn't learn anything, and what was the point? And so I think kids will buy into that if you have a safe space in your class that it's going to be okay. Because the other piece for a lot of kids is that they worry that if the product doesn't turn out, their mark is going to suffer. And this is where the triangulation of assessments really comes in handy, because it gives you the chance to say, hey, you know what? I saw what you were trying to do, and I documented along the way that you had all this great thinking, and you were showing us all of the ways that you were trying to get there. And if it doesn't quite turn out, you know what? That's okay, because there'll be other opportunities, and you probably learned more from that than having this beautiful product that turned out that was super easy to do, that was something you've done like a whole bunch of times before.
Yeah, and so I think you need to really create and foster a space for play, and the kind of culture you foster in your classroom becomes very important in this space. That making a safe space for students to take some risks with their learning and also the demonstration learning. And if it doesn't turn out perfectly, then that's okay, and it's not all about the number or the grade or the mark. And also, again, in that space, as Jamie mentioned, if you're documenting the process and working with students through the process, looking at those observations, those conversations you have with students through the process, it shouldn't just be about the final product. And again, that's a big shift philosophically from an assessment standpoint in your classes and how you look at it. And both Jamie and I are big fans of scoring success and how it ties into our board's assessment evaluation policies. But that idea of triangulation is kind of an equal triangle of looking at conversations, observations, and the product itself. And having those conversations with students and making them aware of that eases those fears a little bit too. And then, when it comes to that final mark, even if the product doesn't turn out perfectly exactly the way they want it to, if the students are aware of where they're going for and can express that to you, that's something that we would say you should be taking into consideration when it comes to the mark as well. So then, Jamie, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
And when speaking of that, so this group was in my class last year, and they had this amazing idea of what they wanted to do. They decided to make a stop motion video. They had their purpose, they had their audience, and then they researched how they wanted to make this happen. But then once they got rolling with it, and they found out they didn't quite have the skills to actually get it to do what they really wanted it to do, their product turned out okay, and they were happy with it, but they weren't 100% happy with it. And they still ended up doing fine in terms of the grade. But what I wanted to show you was, I actually wanted to show you their finished product. I know Trish is going to drop the YouTube clip in that I put there in the excellent. Thank you, Trish. And so if you look at it, well, just go watch the video first, and then we'll talk about it after.
It's nice and short, 32 seconds, so go from there, and we'll just come back in about a minute or so. Okay, it looks like everyone's back from that. Jamie, this was your students, and you had an idea you want to go with this, so how about you jump in here and take it away?
Okay, so they wanted it to be like a flip book, and they were successful in that. But when at the end of their video, they didn't know how to actually draw what they were trying to get across. And so when the class watched it, and then they asked the class what they took from it, the answers weren't right for what they had envisioned. And so they were trying to make it interactive, or not interactive, but they were trying to make it engaging to the teenage audience. They tried to use some cool techniques, but their message got lost. And so then we had this really fascinating conversation where within the class they said, oh, we tried to do this, but it didn't quite work out. And a couple of the kids then in my class said, well, I have a couple ideas. You could have asked me. And so it was this really interesting experience where the kids were like, oh, I didn't think to ask anybody else. This is my project. But within that, we had a whole bunch of interesting conversations along the way of like, what are you trying to get across? How do you know you'll be successful when you've gotten it across? And when it didn't actually come across the way they wanted it to, the class had a really fascinating reflective conversation about what went wrong and where it didn't quite come across the way they wanted it to and what they could have done. And so they still did well on the assignment because technically they did a great job. They were still thinking about their audience. They had a purpose, but the final product didn't actually come out the way they wanted it to and didn't express the message that they wanted it to say. And the audience didn't take away exactly what they wanted them to get across. And so it was really fascinating to see that here it is that this video that was okay technically, and a couple of the other kids were like, well, I would have done this if I was you. It still ended up being like a good learning opportunity, but it was a great chance to talk about the process that the students went through and where things didn't quite go right and, you know, what they would do better for next time. And so that allowed us to have this great chat, and not just with like the three kids in the picture and myself, but also the chance to have the whole class in on the conversation too, which was really quite fascinating.
Okay, so moving along, and you kind of talked about that, and you could kind of decent segue there, Jamie. Thank you. Another thing that we really loved about kind of throwing it back with students and having them leverage different tools in the classroom to show their learning that it really enables them for a lot of voice and choice. You're going to cover your curriculum, your content, your class, and whatever subject you're working through in different ways. But when it comes to that demonstration of learning, giving your students options for how they want to share that, I think can be very, very powerful. And I think a lot of times what we don't realize as teachers is that sometimes, I definitely found this in my classroom, is that sometimes it's the assessments that we give them that's actually the barrier to them demonstrating their learning. And I think kind of going to the space and using media to have students demonstrate their learning in different ways has really opened doors for a lot of students. I'll give you a very simple example. It's even not tied to media. As an English teacher going back like 5 or 6 years in my practice now, in a grade 10 applied English class, we had a core novel called Crab. And so I'd have the students read it, do very traditional method of testing. So I'd have them, do some quizzes on it with some multiple choice. We'd have a test at the end. I'd have them write a paragraph or an essay about the text. And I'd look at what I was getting for my students, and they'd be a lot of like level 1s and level 2s. And I was debating if my students were even reading the book and what's kind of going on. And I was trying to do everything I can to work through the text with them. And then for the summative, actually, like 2.5 months later, I did a summative interview with my students for 10 minutes each. We sat down just talking about a few different things from the course. And one of the questions was about the book. And students just like, some of those students were giving me phenomenal answers and really, really deep insights into the text. And I was going back and it was like level 3s and level 4s. And I was going back and comparing, and the kids, 2.5 months earlier on the same text was like level 1, level 2. And I was like, what's going on here? And they realized it was actually the barrier was the assessment for my students. They weren't good test takers, and they weren't strong writers. And I was assessing their reading through those things. And that was the kind of barrier. But just giving me a chance to sit down and talk to me about it, they were really able to show me the insights they had. And so I think one thing Jamie have realized by giving students different options for how they want to demonstrate their reading and using web media tools in that way has really opened doors for some students to make sure the assessment form is not the barrier, and students are finding ways to demonstrate their learning the best way possible.
The other thing, too, is that there's this phenomenal principal in the United States at a school in Philly. It's called the Science Leadership Academy, and his name is Chris Lehman. And what he says is that if you give students a project and you get 30 of the same project back, you haven't given a project, you've given a recipe. And so that's really framed a lot of my thinking around assessment, is that if I'm having kids do the exact same task, and they're all doing the exact same thing, are they actually learning? And the answer is probably no. And so by giving them the chance to share their voice and by giving them the options to share in their own way, gives them a lot, you're going to see a lot more deeper learning and understanding through that.
Okay, so one thing we want to highlight here, we've talked about kind of like how our students feel in the space, and so one thing Jim and I do at the end of our courses is we give them like an anonymous Google form to kind of reflect on how things are going to CAS, and these are some of the feedback we got from some of our students we kind of want to share with you.
One of the beautiful things about this is that so many of our students are actually engaging in media, and they don't even really know it. That's the other thing too, is that like they don't actually understand that they're producing media for many of them, multiple times a day. Every time they take a Snapchat picture, they filter it, they add a comment or whatever, they're creating media. And what they don't realize is that that actually can be leveraged in a variety of ways, and as teachers, I think that's what we really need to be considering, is that students are doing this, and we have to leverage where they're at. And so by giving them the chance to own this and have their own voice and choice, and giving them the opportunity to do that, we really do see so much more that they are capable of.
Yeah, and I think it was Melanie asked about this earlier too, but one thing to keep in mind too is like we had some students who love being in the space and having that voice and choice, but we also had some students that struggle with it, and you need to be aware of those students as well, and helping them through that process, kind of getting back at their creative selves and finding that creative space and feeling comfortable in that space. So there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all here, something to keep in mind. Okay, that being said, we want to take some time and dive into just some different examples of how we've gotten at opening the doors for our students to think about different ways to demonstrate learning, some ways that's played out. As we mentioned, we're English teachers. These are coming out of English classrooms, but really hope that this can just be ideas for kind of very cross-curricular and cross-panel and cross-grades to give people some ideas of just maybe different things they could do with their students. And again, this isn't things that we direct our students on. It was ideas they came up with to kind of show their learning. Jamie, do you want to speak to this one at all?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think we don't often ask kids to do is we don't ask kids what they're good at. And so when we start our courses, one of the things we ask the kids is to be very honest with yourself. What are your strengths and what are your areas for growth? And not just like in English, but in general, what are you good at? What would you like to get better at? And so when we assigned this was actually our media diagnostic at the beginning of one of our semesters. And we asked the students to get into groups, and we said to them, now talk to people, what are you good at and what are you not good at, and what would you like to get better at? And so the images that you see there on the screen are actually one of the girls in Andrew's class said to her group, I love photography. And so she said, cool, or all the other kids were like, awesome. But then the other kids said, can you teach us? And so we had this really interesting group where they had ideas of what they wanted to do, and they chose to use their limbs to showcase powerful quotes to get their idea across. So they were thinking about their audience, they were thinking about their purpose, and then they were leveraging her love of photography to get this across. And so they had this whole concept that they used, which is beautiful, but really powerful too. And so when we saw this, we were just in awe of their creativity and how they really wanted to showcase what they were thinking. And that's the key piece here, is that you want the thinking to become visible. And so if you're going to use photography, how can kids use photography? And I mean, I don't know what age kids are getting cell phones at. It's probably pretty young, or iPods or anything that takes photos, or having class iPads or whatever. But just by giving students the opportunity to take photos even, really gives them the chance to, and so many of the kids just see taking funny pictures or selfies or whatever as just for fun, when they could be really doing some very interesting things with them and then being powerful and expressing their messages.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was just thinking again about how passing back to students, thinking about leveraging the tools you have in your classroom. And again, they were really just looking at they had this kind of inquiry question: how can you visualize stories acknowledging the wonder and mystery of creation? And so they went to text and found quotations that wanted to visualize that in some way. And so they got to some very deep metaphorical meanings with it. And Trish, if you have the link, could you drop it into the chat for this one? So this link that we actually go to the presentation they put together, if you guys want to have a look. You can see some of the images there too.
What's really powerful is that these photos, they're so much more than what you could write. And so it's really fascinating that students took this opportunity to be creative. And this is our first thing that we had done, and they trusted us, which was great, to let them really run with their creativity. And, seeing this, it's really powerful. And then the other thing too is that the kids knew we trusted them, and that allowed their creativity to flourish.
Yeah, so if you click the link there and have a look through just while we're talking about it, you also see there's another student who wasn't as much into photography, but was really into drawing. And so she talked, well, how can I bring my skills into this space? And so one of the images there at the end of the slide deck, I believe, is actually her drawing. And so the students had a lot of discussion. They kind of went and took their photos and kind of found the quotations they want to focus on. And then a student here, if you get to the one of the drawing, it was talking about how the student wanted to show a reflection of how these students work together and collaborate together to share their own ideas. And she had this wonderful, beautiful description of how the leaves were representing each one of them and this metaphorical meaning. And so again, this was simple, we could have gave them this essay to read and asked them to, answer some questions on the text, something like that. But our students got such a deep metaphorical meanings of the text and what's going on behind it, and was really able to demonstrate their learning in a different way. And it was just because we just opened the door to say, hey, what do you think about this and how do you want to show it to us? And so they got some really, really interesting stuff, and that we found very, very powerful.
The other thing too is that using media in your classroom allows for some very interesting uses of and observations for the learning skills. We know we're supposed to be documenting the learning skills, and by allowing students to have voice and choice, you see a lot, often on the more positive side, them demonstrating those learning skills. Students that potentially might be more of an S, you give them the chance to have their own say in how their learning's going. You're going to see that S oftentimes turn to a G or even an E, depending on who the student is. And so I think that by giving that opportunity and showcasing that, media is a vehicle to get your message across. And so by giving them that opportunity, the vehicle then becomes showing their learning as well.
Definitely. So we've talked about technology in ways. One thing I want to highlight is, we understand it's completely different across the province. It's different board by board, school by school, class by class, and in so many factors. And so we're going to highlight some stuff our students have done here. We applied for a grant from the ministry to get some extra funds, and so you can kind of see what went to that there. So we've got a couple cameras for our classrooms, a couple of iMacs for our students to do some editing and things with and kind of play around with. And we mentioned that we've got a lot of Chromebooks around our board right now, so our students are able to leverage those tools as well. But that wasn't always my case. I've been playing with having students use the media to show their learning in different ways. And I used to have 5 netbooks in my classroom, 7 years ago. And so that was a space they went into. And again, if you're going to have a BYOD policy in your school, it might be having students use their cell phones if you're okay with that in your space in school, or having them use those as learning tools to document their learning. Or again, if it's something you have like a class of 5 iPads, a class of 5 iPads, think about different ways students can use that. And so now just looking at your question, you said, that's how you present the task to students. Is it open-ended or do they have limitations? It really depends task by task for us. I would say, again, we really focus on coming back to the curriculum. So we'll teach the students what we're looking for and kind of like the skills we want to get them at, and then open up the door to how they choose to do that. And so our rubrics will be based on the curriculum and we'll be very front-loaded with talking to them about what we want them to show us, but then maybe give them more open-ended space to go and show that. But I would say it's really task by task, if that somewhat answers your question.
I also think, too, it depends on the students, too. I mean, you have to scaffold for your own kids, right? And within the same class, you might be scaffolding in a different way. Like, some students will have, this will be an amazing opportunity, and they'll have a whole bunch of ideas, and they'll have trouble narrowing it down, and then they'll finally figure out one, and they'll run with it. But there are definitely some students that this is not easy for them, and so you have to guide them through the process a little bit more. And I think that's where when you're engaging and using media, you actually have to be in with the students so much more. This is very much the kind of teaching where you're having conversations with the kids, you're seeing what their process is, and then if they need more guidance, then you just give it to them, and if they don't, then you let them run with it too and do smaller check-ins. But I think it really depends on your students as well. Some will need the check-in, some will need the scaffolding, some will need you to maybe give them like an idea or two, or some of them won't need any of that. And so you really have to think about who your kids are and how you can provide them with the best learning environment possible.
Yeah, like I said, there's no one size fits all again. And so if you think about a much more traditional classroom with teacher at the front sharing knowledge with students saying this is what you need to know, you're going to have some students in your class who that works really, really well for, and they're going to run with that and they're going to fly with that. And then you have some students who that kind of front-loading kind of teacher-centric approach doesn't work for them. Like the learning and the retention is not very strong. And like we said, by going to more of an inquiry approach or an open-ended approach, you're going to see some of those kids who struggle with that teacher-centric approach. They're going to go off and fly out and be super successful. And then you might see some of those kids with the more traditional model really start to struggle. And so again, it's just getting to know your learners and kind of helping with them and guiding them through the process and knowing what their strengths and weaknesses. So we talked a little bit about how in the WRDSB kind of our experiences. We're 3 years into a one-to-one pilot project now. It's not even a pilot anymore. And so, year 3, so at our school, every kid in grade 9, 10, 11 has a Chromebook that they keep and carry around with them. But again, we're very conscious and aware that that's not the space across Ontario for everybody. And again, the amount of technology in the classroom is very, very different and kind of trots around. But one thing we did want to talk about and highlight is just some of the tools we've used. Again, we want to focus more on pedagogy here. We think there's tons of tools out there, and you can find them. Students can find them pretty easily. But there are some tools that we've used in different spaces here too that we found very effective in some simple ways that we think might be great for teachers to use. Jamie, do you want to start off and talk about a few here?
Sure. And so I will tell you that probably one of my favorite tools that is actually a KW company is called, we have an image there that says Viewed It. It's actually called Vidyard Go Video. And it's a screencasting tool. And so for us, we're a Google board with the Chromebooks. And so we have our students add this Chrome extension at the beginning of every semester if they don't already have it. And what it does is, well, you'll see in a few minutes, but the beautiful thing that we love about this tool is that it allows you to screencast, so you can record your screen, but it also provides you with the opportunity to see the student if they so desire, or you can just do an audio recording. And so that's been really powerful for us. It's really easy to have the kids just talk. And then you can pick out what you're looking for there. You can see the expectations that they're meeting by listening to them talk about this. And it's really powerful too in terms of, like, you can be sitting at home on your couch listening to your students talk about the learning that's happening, and it's just a super easy way to do that. And for your gamers in the class, many of them are actually quite familiar with screencasting because they do it, or they watch YouTube videos where people have screencasted the game that they're playing. So many of the kids are actually quite familiar with the idea of screencasting, and it's a very quick, easy snapshot of their learning. The other one that we're going to give you some insight into is Biteable. And Biteable is what it calls the world's simplest video maker. And to be honest, I've shown my students this a couple of times, and they just pick it up right away and run with it. It's free, and you can have, if you want to pay for it, you can have more, you can have fancier things it does. But it's pretty easy and allows the kids to make these really cool little videos that are pretty awesome.
Yeah, so we're going to actually get a demo that I showed too. But the other two I mentioned here, like Pictochart is a great space for students to create infographics. And again, not something you need to front load to a teacher. We've kind of just thrown our students into it and say, go figure it out, and they actually have. And My Double was a great tool licensed by OSAPAC for across Ontario, and students have for mind mapping great visualizations that would work in a lot of grades as well too. But jumping ahead here, Jamie talked a bit deeply there about Video2Go, Video Biteable, and so she kind of did a video here to share with you all the kind of example of the two tools. So the first thing you're seeing watching this video with Video2Go is her actually creating that kind of video, but she uses it to talk about Biteable. Jamie, before we play here, do you want to introduce it?
I think you just did. Don't laugh too hard because, yeah, this is, yeah. Anyway, the students are far more eloquent than I am oftentimes.
Okay, so we wanted to demo this for you, so Jamie was kind enough to go ahead and make this video for you to kind of demonstrate what Video2Go looks like. So again, same deal. Trish just posted the video in there link for you. Again, Trish, right on point. Thank you. And so we're going to turn off our mics here, let you all go and watch this video. You can get an example of how Biteable works and how Video2Go works. And again, once you've watched it, please just come back and give us that green check mark so we know that you're back.
Okay, well, it looks like everybody's back now, so thanks for watching that. And, you know, super embarrassing, but oh well. So what we have here on the next slide is actually a link to an example that I talked about in the video of students who made a Biteable video. We're considering the time. Trish, if you wouldn't mind just dropping the link in there, please. Excellent, thank you. Please feel free to go watch this on your own time just so that we can get through everything else and get you out of here in good time.
Yeah, Jamie, thank you for sharing that video. And so, again, this is a student example of using Biteable, which is great, but again, we'll come to it later. And again, as we saw a Video2Go video in action there, it's a great way to have students just go through learning whatever they create, if it's on this computer screen, to just kind of record that screen and sit there and talk about it. We've leveraged a bunch of different ways, even just a quick audio reflection students that they kind of post back into Google Classroom. It's a great way to have them document learning different ways, or kind of take you through the research and what they've been finding online with their own voiceover and sharing with you. You can find some really, really great ways for students to demonstrate their learning with that tool. So we've had a lot of great success with that one. Now, as we're going through this, you might be asking yourself, okay, that's cool, and yeah, voice and choice sounds great. If you're doing some inquiry process and have my students doing different things with media, yeah, I get it.
Other buzzword that's out there.
Sorry?
You said every other buzzword that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. But then it comes down to, how do I mark this? Which is a great and fair question. So we wanted to speak to that a little bit too. And we've already touched on it a bit with a few questions that have popped up. But again, I would say like all things, obviously you've got to come back to your curriculum. And so what I think what it really starts with is your rubrics should be asking for something very, very specific, but tied to the learning you want your students to get and what's going on in your curriculum. And then having those conversations with your students, being very explicit for what's been covered in the class, what the kind of expected learning is, and then how for them to demonstrate that to you. And so if your rubrics or whatever, the way you're assessing is looking at your curriculum and the students are aware of that, then thinking about giving them different ways to demonstrate that learning to you. Jamie, any other this one?
Well, I was thinking we should move on.
All right, sounds good. So how about you jump up to this one?
Okay, so here we have the triangulation of assessment. And with that, we really, especially in our school right now, we've been talking a lot about conversations and observations and how do you have good data on your students. Our admin team is very much focused on products are great, and this is all coming from Growing Success. Products are great, but what other kinds of learning is happening in your classroom, and what are you seeing your students produce for you on a daily basis? And so with that in mind, we are looking for more than just what the students create. And this is where media allows you to have those really great conversations and observations and gives you that good data that you might not see just in our regular product. So allows you to really spend the time thinking outside your curriculum or thinking about your curriculum in a very deep way, and then seeing what your students are doing with it and how you can observe them showing you that they're meeting expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we talked about this a bit earlier, so I don't think we'll dive more deeper there too, but looking at that learning as a process and trying to get your data, I think is really, really key to jumping into this space with students and looking at this space and feeling confident with your assessments. I will tell you it is not easy the first time you do it. It's been an evolution for me as a teacher for sure, but I feel really, really great about it now. But it does take time and practice, like everything else. So just some examples here of like an observations, like as you're working through and whatever you want to choose to document, it could be totally just having a notebook and pen and paper is a great way to kind of track the student learning and like make observations through class. Jim and I have settled on this free tool online for assessments called Markboard. If you're familiar with chalk.com or Planboard, it's a sister assessment tool for that, where you can have your students in there and like look at to put in your assessments of them and tracked by the curriculum, which has been really great. But it also has an observational tool where you can just go in and type in some quick comments, or there's an app where you can go in there and record a quick conversation with a student, add that to their profile, or snap some pictures of the work too. So just thinking about a good workflow, whatever that may be for you, to document student learning and look at those observations and conversations, I would say become a key piece of this. If that's like snapping pictures of student work in class, recording conversations with an iPad or something, or just taking some quick notes, either digitally or analog through paper, is a great, great way to go. Okay, Jamie, you want to speak to rubrics and feedback a little bit?
Yeah, so for us, the feedback loop is very, very important. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time with our students on is that the first crack at learning the first demonstration isn't the finished product. And at our school, we really are very much focusing on the idea of formative feedback. And what we've done in our English class is that we give the students the chance to submit to us and then get some feedback from us and then resubmit. And so within that, Andrew and I have been experimenting with these kinds of rubrics where we're actually we put feedback on the document the students hand in through Google Classroom, but we also are using rubrics where instead of just using the indicators from the ministry documents like insightful, thorough, that kind of thing, we're actually giving students feedback right in the document, about very targeted about what they can actually do to improve. And so it allows us to really give them some feedback that we think is actually way more helpful and way more student-friendly too. I mean, what does insightful mean? To you, it might mean something completely different to a student. And so by giving them the targeted feedback within the rubric, where we just write it in, makes it, and by using the specific expectations with underneath the overall expectation, allows us to really then hone in on what we're asking students to provide for us.
Yeah, and this is just one example. There's a lot of different ways to get at it, and it's really class by class, subject by subject, assignment by assignment even. But this is one space that we've kind of found to be relatively effective where students kind of are open-ended in this space. So getting toward the end of the presentation here, one thing we really want to do is just share some exemplars in different spaces our students have gone with this open-ended task to kind of demonstrate their learning in different ways, and hopefully give you some ideas you may be able to take to your classrooms yourselves, or suggest your students with some possibilities for them to show their learning to you. So one space we've played around with is video. And so Trish, we're going to have to drop a couple links in here. These are relatively short off the top here, kind of the first ones here. And this is actually came out of the same assignment going back to one of the first ones we showed you with the pictures and the text writing on the body. So really quick video here. This was like, how do stories help bring people together? Was the kind of inquiry question they were kind of looking at, the focus for this. And so it's a really quick video, so you want to click the link in YouTube there and just go and watch what these students created with the space. Okay, so it looks like most are back. And so, like I said, this actually came, if you remember that task we talked about earlier with the photos the students took of quotations, like how using their bodies and things like that. This was the exact same assignment. You can see how like different students, different groups look at it in very different ways and leverage their skills in different ways. And so this group, their kind of challenge was to visualize this idea of how do stories create community. And this came out of an essay by Scarsell Sanders that we read in class. And traditionally in class, I use this as like a diagnostic paragraph and just had students write about their thinking, what they took out of it. And then as we evolved this assignment, we kind of opened up to them and said, well, we want you to visualize this in some way and show us your learning. And again, I would say two very different things, but both very, very impactful. And like there were the deep insights in this video I thought were really profound, and having the students present this to the class and share their thinking about it, I found it got into a much deeper level of their thinking and that what they were able to show me from their learning from this than I had seen if I had just asked them to write a paragraph about it. Jamie, anything you want to add to this one?
Well, I actually wanted to address Laura's question. She asked how much time do you spend curating your students' learning? It really depends for me on what's happening in the room at the time. So we do have a lot of time where students work in class, and there's also times where I'll sit and talk with a group and see what they're doing, and sometimes I might try and take an audio recording, or I might try and make some notes as they're talking, but then there's other times where I just have a really good conversation with them and I don't document it. Because I don't think you can spend your whole time trying to document everything. I think you have to be very intentional about what you're looking for, and also be open to the fact that you might be looking for something and you might get something else instead. It's all about knowing your expectations and knowing what you're looking for from your students. But I think because you could document every single day, truly. But I think that it's really thinking about trying to catch them at different times. And so in the brainstorming phase, I try to catch them. I try to catch them one time kind of in the process phase. And then I ask them to document their own reflection. And so I really think it depends on you as an individual, as a teacher, but it also depends on what's happening in your classroom at the same time.
And one thing I want to highlight this assignment too is that we were giving a chance to show their media skills in the classroom, but we were really more looking at their understanding of a text and how they read an essay. And again, so how they showed that reading was really relevant. If writing was the best space for them to do that, was fine. Some students showed it through photography. These students showed us to show it through video. And again, they showed us they had a very strong understanding of what the author was trying to say, but I thought it was really powerful seeing how they came up with it and how they chose to answer that. Jamie, do you want to go into the only human video here too, or should we leave that just kind of have Blake drop in and move on?
We actually don't have that one.
Oh, okay, never mind. That makes it easy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so another example here, we did a study of Shakespeare and wanted to look at the skill of collaboration with our students as well too, but also again of textual analysis. And I mentioned earlier, like with that crab story, I talked with my class earlier about how I thought my assessments were getting in the way of my students showing their learning. And so this is another space where you ask students to kind of show us like the understanding, like choose an element of the text from what they've been reading and choose to show us your understanding of it in some way. And so this one, the students chose to focus on like motifs and symbols that popped up in the play Macbeth, but then try to show their understanding of symbols and motifs. And again, in a traditional way, I might have done this in the past, would be I give a test and I ask the students like list a similar motif and then give me your analysis of the places that showed up in the play. But in this video, the students chose to go a very different route in how they chose to demonstrate that. So,
the other thing to keep in mind with this is that the student then found online the movie and then chose very specific scenes from it. But your students can do that too. I mean, depending on what you're asking them to show you, students are able to download YouTube videos and to remix them into something else. And so just allowing them to be a little bit more creative like that. And lots of students do actually play around with that kind of thing. So that is another way that you can be thinking about having that, is remixing somebody else's thinking, which is what she did in this video.
For sure. I think even though it's a quick video, just looking at time here too, we'll have Trish drop it in if you want to come back and or save the link for a bit later. It's very quick, but it's just a quick remix of how the student chose to look at this video, and again highlight those symbols and motifs that came out of the play. But I think we'll move on here just to get people out of here on time. Another space we chose to look at with our students was infographics and mind maps. Again, so looking at their learning through different things and then demonstrating in a visual way. Trish, again, we'll ask you just if you want to just drop these links in here, and as Jamie and I are speaking to them, feel free to have a look at the work there. Once you click the link, you get a chance to zoom in on them a little bit too. And so this was different texts our students have been reading in class, and then them showing their understanding of the text by blending the visual and the textual space. So one came out of a group novel, then these students had chosen for Ender's Game, and another couple similar here, their study of Shakespeare, and the text they're reading in that space there too.
So even we use this with Shakespeare, but this could be done with virtually anything, any subject really. What are you trying, like if you're trying to get your students to showcase that they've understood some kind of content, this is a great way to have them do that, is by taking some ideas and thinking about how would you display this visually for an audience that they can learn something from you, and take something away from your knowledge. So I mean, like science lends itself really nicely to this. I think you could do some really cool stuff with math too. And it's all about us seeing their creativity flourish and how they explain their ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Even from a geographical standpoint, just think about how can students bring images in to go with text to really show and demonstrate their learning, and it opens up some really interesting opportunities for them to make connections with certain things, to kind of show their creative side a little bit and think about how do images impact their thinking as well. You'll see some students might be much more visually based than they are text-based, or they are verbally. And so this gives those students an opportunity to show their learning in a different way as well, as you can see as that plays out with some of these infographics here. Okay, so I think the links are there for you. You can feel free to look at them as we're kind of moving on. But again, we want to make sure we know your time. Another space that we really try to play with media, and this is very simple, that can be used like in most grades and definitely cross-curricular in the kind of in the subject area, was quick audio reflections. These are a very simple space. If it's with a Chromebook or a computer lab or on an iPad or on their cell phone, having students make just very quick audio recordings, or even for yourself walking around and recording some conversations with students, can be very powerful and impactful. It's a very, very simple thing, but giving students the opportunity to just express themselves verbally, which again, we don't always have time to have 30 conversations with our students in our classes, but in this way you can have that asynchronous conversation almost. And again, sometimes if it's writing or a test or a lab or whatever it may be, sometimes with the assessments, a barrier for some students. A lot of our students tend to be very good verbally and expressing themselves verbally. And so this was a great opportunity for us to kind of look to have students share their conversations One example here that's linked out is actually through just Video2Go, which Jamie mentioned, showed you guys earlier, was just students on a Chromebook talking about something they covered in class and sharing their learning on it. And so with that, kind of get into the very end of our presentation here and wrapping things up. Jamie, do you want to jump in and kind of talk about some reflections you took away from this?
Yeah, so more than anything, I think what media allows us to do is to see kids thinking in a visual format. I think that for school, we see thinking displayed as written text. And I think what the beautiful thing that media allows us to do is that we can now think, because we think in pictures, so now we can see how kids are thinking in pictures. And so for a lot of kids too, this is like great engagement, because so many of them have their phones out taking photos all the time or making little videos or that kind of thing. It allows them to engage more with the text. The other thing too is that it's great for the learning skills, because you see some of the other skills demonstrated that you might not see in a more traditional task. But at the same time, we get pushback, and we get pushback regularly from students about this, because they're used to playing the game of school, and we're changing the rules on them. And a lot of them see the benefit of this, but you're still going to have the kids who don't see it as exactly the same way. And so for them, it's a bit more work, but I think you just have to show them the value of why this is good for them, because all it does is it makes you a more well-rounded person. If you can demonstrate your thinking in writing, if you can demonstrate your thinking visually, if you can demonstrate your thinking verbally, you have skills for life. And so in thinking about that, I think that's the selling feature for students, and when they try and push back on you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the learning skills are a big focus from here too. And some of you ask questions like, how does it work for your students, or how do you get in this space? And I think looking at those skills, one, we looked at collaboration a great deal and kind of pushing our students into a space to work together and to learn from each other and work together in that space. And then also things like taking initiative on their own and kind of pushing themselves. And then how they work independently. If you open up that classroom space for them to think about their own learning, are they good working independently? And so looking at those learning skills can really help in guiding students through those learning skills, and helping through that can really help in this process as well. Looking at the clock here, we're 2 minutes before 9, so like right on schedule. So both Jamie and I would like to thank you for joining us tonight. It's been great having you here. We hope you took something away from it. And again, like I mentioned, we're always happy to connect with teachers after the fact. So feel free to find us on Twitter and reach out to us. Jamie?
Oh yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, we love to share what we do in the classroom, and hopefully you found that helpful.
And so don't run away yet. I know Trish is going to have a quick spiel here to do. And Trish, thank you again tonight for being so fantastic.
Thank you very much, Trish.
Oh, my pleasure. Wow, that was a great one, filled with fabulous resources. And of course, as always, your terrific student examples. That's so valuable. And thank you to the audience tonight. You were terrific. Some great questions. I know our presenters always love that when you connect, but many of you have done this before, so that was really terrific. So here's the link. I'm also going to pop links into the chat area. And you know what to do. Head for that feedback. You'll get a certificate generated after that. And don't forget about AQ courses. They still are, that subsidy is still available. And let's see what else. Oh, I'm going to stop that recording.